Welcome to episode 13 of Renewing the Conversation, a series of interviews where we talk to leading industry professionals and experts about renewable energy and heating, with a focus on the home and what challenges face the industry and homeowners.
Today, welcome Jon Fletcher, CEO of Big Clean Switch. Jon tells us why electricity tariffs have risen so sharply this year, leading to many electricity providers going bust, and explains why electricity costs vary depending on where you are in the UK.
Before we get started, we want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, the MCS, which define, maintain and improve quality by certifying products and installers so homeowners can have confidence in the low carbon technology they invest in. To find out more, head over to www.mcscertified.com.
Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below and please show us your support by giving us a thumbs up. Enjoy the interview. Hi, good morning, Jon. Thank you so much for joining us. The internet connection is a little bit shaky today, so I'm really hoping that it's going to stick with us for the interview. There's been no denying that in especially the last couple of months, the energy crisis and electricity discussion has been splashed all over the news. And it's been a top headline for many weeks. It's starting to dissipate, or it's not really being the top headline when I turn the news on. Are we still in an energy crisis? Is it still ongoing? And what are we kind of expecting to happen in the next few months?
Unfortunately, we are still in an energy crisis. It is ongoing. I suppose it's the way with these things that the news cycle tends to move on. On the plus side at the moment, when we're filming this, COP is very much replacing the energy crisis in the news, and it's great to see climate change at the forefront of the agenda. But yes, the energy crisis continues to rumble on. Energy prices, which have been driving the crisis, have dropped away slightly in the last couple of weeks, but we think that's probably a short-term drop. And the conditions that were causing the crisis continue to prevail. So unfortunately, I think it's going to be with us for some time to come.
For those that have just seen the top headlines of energy crisis and electricity tariffs soaring, but have not really delved into articles further than that, can you just give us a little bit of a summary as to why electricity companies are finding themselves in these really dramatic situations, in some cases bankruptcy?
Yes, absolutely. And excuse me if I kind of go a little bit deep into the way that the energy market works, and possibly also rant a little bit, because being stuck in the middle of this, you do tend to get a unique perspective on it. Energy prices that energy suppliers pay for the energy that they then sell to us have been rising pretty steadily for the last 12 months or so. And in particular, they've been driven by the price of gas, which has fallen in terms of the amount of gas we've got stored to unprecedented levels. And that's been compounded by constraints on supply from Russia, who have been trying to place geopolitical pressure on countries within Europe to open up a second pipeline to allow them to sell more gas to Europe. And in an effort to try to get that signed off, they have been restricted gas supply into Europe, which has been pushing prices up further. Now, you might wonder why gas prices would affect electricity prices. That's because, unfortunately, for those of us who are equally worried by climate change, a large proportion of the UK's electricity supply is actually generated by gas-powered power stations, so power stations that are burning gas in order to generate electricity. And that means that we are all exposed to gas prices, not just if we have gas boilers rather than heat pumps, and hopefully that's a diminishing part of the population, and I know a subject that you talk about a great deal, but also those of us who are using electricity are exposed to those gas prices. Now, the impact of those gas prices on suppliers has been accentuated because Ofgem, the UK energy regulator, introduced a piece of legislation about 2 or 3 years ago that was intended to protect those households who generally don't choose a supplier. So they do nothing, they accept whatever tariff their current supplier places them on. And those tariffs have historically been eye-wateringly expensive. The penalty for inaction has been huge. And Ofgem, I think for very good reasons, introduced what was called the price cap to limit the amount that suppliers could charge customers who are on those tariffs that are called the default tariffs, the tariff you end up on if you don't select a cheaper tariff. Now, as wholesale prices have risen, the price that suppliers are paying for the electricity they're selling to us have risen, the price cap has failed to keep track of that. So we found ourselves in a situation where, first of all, the gap between the cheapest tariffs on the market and the price cap was diminishing, as the cheapest tariffs, which were responding to rising wholesale costs, went up and up and up. And then sadly, in kind of over the summer, most suppliers found that they could no longer offer tariffs that were cheaper than the price cap. That has continued, so that the cheapest tariff that is available on the market at the moment for a medium consumption household is about £400 or £500 or more expensive than the price cap. And so a mechanism that was designed to prevent suppliers from profiteering is instead pausing switching within the market, because it's no longer makes any financial sense to switch your tariff right now. But it's also, as more and more customers drop off fixed rate tariffs onto those standard variable tariffs that are held at the price cap, forcing suppliers into ever greater losses, because they can't charge the same amount for or more for the energy that they're selling to us as they're having to pay for it on the wholesale market. But they can't lose those customers. So that's why we're seeing so many suppliers ceasing trading at the moment. And my heart goes out to those suppliers. We know the founders of many of them. They're generally well-run, responsible companies, many of whom have been trying to pioneer changes within the renewable electricity supply market. And it's heartbreaking to see them effectively regulated out of business by a mechanism that was designed to protect households from profiteering rather than enforced losses.
So this is the situation we found ourselves in now. How are we going to get out of this mess that we've actually found ourselves in?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose there's a long-term answer to that, and there's a short-term answer. In the short term, the sort of forecast for household finances isn't great. The price cap is going to be under review by Ofgem. In my view, 6 to 9 months too late. I think we could have saved an awful lot of suppliers if it had been reviewed earlier. The key consideration that Ofgem is likely to be including in that review is how quickly the price cap is adjusted to reflect wholesale prices. So we would have avoided the current situation in terms of the impact on suppliers had the price cap more accurately tracked wholesale prices. The way it's worked to date is that it's reflected the wholesale prices 6 months earlier, and so you get this horrible mismatch. The challenge that government faces in general, and I would like to see much more being talked about in the news on this, is that one way or another, those high prices are going to find themselves filtering through to households and businesses. And even had the price cap been adjusted previously, what would have happened is that we would have been seeing those high prices effectively being passed on to the consumers of the energy earlier. And the key question for me is, how do we protect households who can't afford to pay for that energy? They're already, even at the current price cap level, going to be families facing very, very difficult decisions over this winter. And they need a great deal more support in terms of being able to protect themselves and ensure that they're not making choices, for example, between heat and food. And I think that's something I would like to see being paid much more attention in the media. As we approach the spring, it's likely that the price cap is going to be increased. Whether or not it's increased in a way that then tracks wholesale, or whether it's just using the previous model, the current forecasts are anywhere between £600 to £800 increase in the level of the price cap. That will mean that the price cap tariff, if that comes to pass, is broadly in the £1,800 to £2,000 per year bracket for a medium consumption dual fuel household. That goes up from somewhere between £800 to £950 a year for most of the time we've been running Big Clean Switch. So the impact on households is huge, and we all need to be bracing ourselves for higher energy prices going forward. The key thing is that at the same time as the price cap is forecast to increase, wholesale prices should start to drop away. There is generally a seasonal curve. So as we come out of winter, traders become more confident that we can build up gas reserves over the summer months when people are using less energy. Prices tend to fall away. So what we're likely to be left with as we approach the spring is the inverse of the current situation, where we've got a price cap that once again is much higher than the tariffs that are available on the market. And at that point, the advice to households is going to switch from stay put and do nothing to switch at all costs. And so that's the message that we're trying to kind of get across to people. You can only switch now if you can really afford to. There are still fixed price tariffs on the market. If you're on a fossil fuel tariff and you really want to get onto a green tariff, for example, it is possible to do that, but you are going to be paying an awful lot more. Financially, it's best to sit tight and do nothing right now, but you have to be aware that, stick a lot of calendar reminders in your diary for March, April time, because at that point, if not earlier, the situation is going to reverse and you have to be ready to take action.
It sounds like it's an awful lot for a company like the Big Clean Switch to try and navigate, because I can't imagine that would do your business much good on a monthly basis when you know that you've got this massive dry spell where everybody's being told do not switch, and then you're going to be expecting next year lots and lots of people switching. How does that affect you as a company internally? It's
been challenging in terms of the household switching that we do, certainly. Having what is effectively half of our business put on pause introduces some difficulties. We've had to look quite hard at some of our costs. We are lucky that we've always been focused on helping both homes and businesses to switch to green energy, and whilst the price cap is sort of skewing the market a little bit on the domestic side, there isn't a parallel mechanism in place for businesses. And so businesses are facing much more immediate increases in their energy costs as a result of the rising wholesale prices. And so we're continuing to support businesses in switching their energy. So we haven't shut down our business overnight, and many of the businesses that we're working with are desperately keen to get help and advice on how to make the right choices in a very difficult situation. If you're a business and you've been used to paying what we consider to be relatively little for your energy prices historically have been fairly low in the UK, and you're now facing a very sudden, very sharp increase. If you're a low margin business, that can make an enormous difference to your sustainability, coming only a few months after the economy starts to open up after COVID. So for many of the businesses that we're talking to, it's a really difficult time, and they're really desperate to understand the measures they can take. I suppose the other side of the conversations that we're having increasingly with both households and businesses is, how can we reduce our energy consumption overall? And I think in terms of our climate mission, the increased focus on energy prices may be a good thing, albeit with horrible economic and social consequences, because it may fast track decisions, particularly in businesses around, for example, utilizing roof space for solar PV or installing commercial heat pumps. And the same goes for households. So there are positives to be taken from the current situation, and we're providing support to businesses and homes to help them through that. But it is still a very difficult time. Yeah.
Typically, when you say businesses, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but kind of I think that people immediately kind of think of offices or retail spaces, but you kind of forget that actually businesses also applies to restaurants, coffee shops, B&Bs, small hotels, boutique hotels, and these are companies that really, really heavily rely on energy and electricity. So that just sounds like such an incredibly challenging time for them, especially on, as you said, the back end of what has been a really horrific 18 months for so many small businesses already.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got customers who run small hotel chains, or, as you said, coffee shops, and they're coming out of a period where they were in an enforced shutdown and had no revenue coming in. And the government support has falling away as the economy opens up, and they've rolled straight into another seismic shock. These are what we would previously have called once in a generation incidents that have occurred within the space of 18 months. So it's very difficult for a lot of businesses, and really, really feel for them.
So when we moved into our property, one of the first things that we did as part of our sustainability journey was to try and find an electricity provider that was green and that offered green energy. The one thing that became quite apparent is that even though they were marketed as green, was it more of a marketing ploy? And are green energy providers genuinely using renewable energy to provide your electricity?
The answer to that does depend on the energy provider that you're looking at. That's one of the reasons why we created Big Clean Switch. When we first started out, I was trying to find out more about green tariffs in order to select a green tariff for our own home, and was struck by the number of competing claims there were in the marketplace and how difficult it was to unpick the truth behind those. So what we've done with Big Clean Switch is try to create a very binary mechanism where we evaluate suppliers and tariffs against a set of criteria that we sense checked with environmental NGOs and industry bodies, and then provide our users with a very simple yes, they tick these boxes, or no, they don't. So a lot of the confusion is taken away. In terms of what underpins that, some of the common issues that we've seen in green tariffs lie around where the companies are sourcing the green energy. And before I talk a bit about that, it's probably worth talking about a bit about how green tariffs work, in general. Mm-hmm. So because we're all on a shared grid, shared by lots of generation types, so lots of power stations putting energy in, and shared by all of us, lots of us taking energy out, it's not possible for us to say, I want my electricity to come from, that solar farm over there or that wind farm. So the way that every green tariff works, irrespective of what were the claims of the company, is that your supplier is guaranteeing that whenever you take a unit of power out of the shared grid, an equivalent unit of green power has been put into the grid. And the way that that is proven is through a system of certification. So whenever a green generator, a wind farm, say, puts a unit of green power into the grid, the government gives them a certificate. In the UK, that's called a Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin, or REGO, different names in other countries. But that certificate is effectively becomes the greenness of the energy. And so a supplier, when they sell us electricity, can go and purchase an equivalent number of those certificates to match the amount of electricity that we take out of the grid. And that means that we as consumers have ring-fenced our part of the green energy supply. Now, one of the things that's really important within that system to make sure it works is that the suppliers cancel the certificate once they've purchased it, so that it can't be effectively claimed and then sold again. And so there is a openly accessible registry of certificates, so that we as consumers can actually go and see which certificates have been purchased by which suppliers and cancelled by the suppliers from which renewable energy sources, right down to the specific wind farm, which, if you're a renewable energy geek like me, is kind of interesting, but for most people is probably probably several levels of detail too far. So one of the issues that we get a bit cross about at Big Clean Switch is the fact that within the UK, a supplier is allowed to call their tariff green whilst sourcing the certificates from outside of the UK. So the European equivalent to the REGO is called a Guarantee of Origin. And suppliers in the UK have historically been able to go and purchase guarantees of origin to match the electricity that we consume as users within the UK. And for us, that totally undermines the impact of our choices as consumers in driving sort of demand side pressure to create more renewable assets, because it dilutes the impact in a marketplace that is huge. And what we would really like to see and enforce through our own criteria is that when you choose a green tariff, your supplier is guaranteeing that the green electricity is being provided to the same grid that you're taking the electricity out of. So if you're here in the UK, the green energy generation is also here in the UK too.
A lot of times, especially, I think maybe it's starting to balance out a little bit, but certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, green choices in your life, whether it's been organic food or, cleaning products or whatever, typically they're more expensive. And I see behind you, it says cheap green energy for homes and businesses. Is it true? Can you get green energy cheaper or at least comparable to buying energy from companies that are not in renewables?
So I'm going to answer that question in a few different parts. Part one is going to be pretending that the last few months haven't happened. And so the answer is yes. Up until about June, July time, the cheapest green tariffs were among the cheapest tariffs on the market. And that is actually a cause of some criticism of green tariffs. As I said, the way that green tariffs work in general is that your supplier is guaranteeing that they're purchasing REGOs or green energy certificates to match the electricity that you're consuming. The actual electricity that they buy is usually purchased on the wholesale market, which is one of the reasons why gas prices are so influencing the price of electricity tariffs right now. Now, critics of REGOs have said that companies are free to go and purchase their electricity through the cheapest possible mechanism and then simply purchase these certificates on top. And the certificates themselves haven't cost very much. Now, the reason they haven't cost very much is a bit of a catch-22. Historically, demand for green electricity tariffs has been behind supply. The government's actually done quite a good job over a period of a decade and a half or so at incentivizing the growth of some, particularly offshore wind, renewable generation. And it now accounts for something between 40 and 50% of our total electricity supply. Now, that means that we need an awful lot of people asking for green electricity tariffs in order to match that demand and then start to use our choices as consumers to drive more renewable generation. Particularly, I would like to see from generation, other sorts of renewable generation sources, onshore wind, solar, etc. That creates a bit of a kind of strange dynamic in terms of the pricing of green tariffs. While the answer to your question, are green tariffs cheap, is yes, it's partly because the price of the green energy certificates has been cheap in the past. And actually, we have in the last year or so started to see the impact of greater demand for those certificates on the price, and the price has gone up quite a bit. Now, it would have to go up quite a lot more to start making a significant difference in terms of the prices that you pay for a green tariff versus the prices paid for tariffs from other sources. But that is a possibility that we have to be aware of, that as more of us switch to green tariffs, the cost of green tariffs may sort of almost counterintuitively go up. The flip side of that is that green generation is much cheaper than conventional fossil fuels or indeed nuclear. And so if, as more of us switch to green energy tariffs, we're able to drive greater renewables capacity on the grid and hopefully a more diverse renewables capacity on the grid, then the wholesale cost of electricity should be impacted by that. And so there may be a softening of the impact of the REGO price by a drop in the underlying price of electricity. Now, there's an awful lot of moving parts in that equation, so it's impossible to say for sure. But I think overarching, it is true to say that certainly green energy tariffs are, in normal market conditions, very competitive in terms of price. And long term, green energy offers us the cheapest possible way to generate our power. So I think where the middle ground lies, not sure, but the ultimate end game is, yeah, definitely it's the cheapest way to go.
The market obviously saw purge with a lot of electricity providers going bankrupt, as we mentioned earlier. Do you think that all new providers, I would assume maybe next year coming to market, should all be green? And would that accelerate the amount of renewables that the UK would start installing, be it wind farms, more, whatever it is that they have to put in?
I would love to see a requirement that all new market entrants had to provide green power. I think there might be some challenges in that. I'm not sure that you could justify making that a requirement on new market entrants and not impose it on existing ones. I think many of the big players in the electricity retail space, so the companies that sell electricity to us, are also the owners of huge generation assets, some of which are fossil fuel assets. And so there's a strange game that's being played whereby they're often trying to sell green electricity tariffs to cover part of their generation, but continue to invest in fossil fuel generation elsewhere. And I think you need a level playing field. I think the likelihood is that new entrants to the market will offer green energy anyway, because they tend to be challenger brands who are trying to differentiate themselves. And that's why companies like Octopus have been so successful in growing very fast, because they've combined great customer service, very good underlying systems, and renewable energy tariffs. So I think it's likely that renewable energy tariffs will be kind of the norm for new market entrants. I think the bigger question that you asked is in terms of how effective that will be as a driver of greater renewable capacity, and that is really up to us as consumers. The more of us that sign up to these tariffs, the greater impact they'll have. And just to explain a bit about what I was talking about around diversified renewable energy assets and the price of certificates, the challenge in terms of green tariffs in the past acting as drivers of renewables capacity has been that the commercial impact of our choice has been through the price that the generator is paid for the certificate. And if the certificate doesn't have much value, then it doesn't add much incentive to renewable generators to build more renewable generation assets. So even for somebody like, say, a community solar company, the cost of the certificates hasn't had much impact. Recently, the increases in the prices of the certificates have started to get towards the level that local renewable energy generators have previously cited as starting to be interesting from the point of view of the commercials of developing their renewables projects. And that's where we can have real impact as consumers. The more of us who are purchasing those green energy tariffs, the higher the price of those certificates.
One thing I did want to ask you about, though, is tidal. As an island with such a massive coastal line, why are we not investing more in tidal? That is a renewable energy that we know it will come every single day, irrespective of the weather. So why is that not something that we can start to look at more as a renewable energy as a country and an island?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think, there's particular Swansea Bay tidal lagoon has been trying to, get progress and planning consent for some time now. And it's frustrating that that hasn't been given the go-ahead, given our sort of unique geographical benefits, as you say. And I don't think it's just about tidal. I think it's also about investing more in things like pumped storage. There does probably need to be a role to play for some of the biofuels where you can at least get consistency of supply. I'm not a great fan of biofuels that rely heavily on virgin crops to generate the gases. But I do think that we should be doing as much as possible to kind of make the most of the waste products that we generate, whilst without incentivizing generation of waste products. And localized storage and battery storage will also need to come into play.
When we look at our electricity bills, we see that says standing charge. What exactly is the standing charge and what is it paying for?
So the standing charge is effectively, I tend to equate it to, and this is probably going to show my age now, because I don't think a lot of people even kind of relate to their phone bills in this way anymore. But back in the day, you used to get line rental, and then you used to pay for the calls, and the standing charge is the equivalent of the line rental. So it's the money that the supplier is paying in charges and levies to maintain and improve the grid, so metering, transmission lines, etc. The slight, I suppose, mischief there is that suppliers are free to choose how much they charge in standing charge and how much of those levies are effectively covered under the unit rate. So in some ways that's good, because you get tariffs that can pay you lower standing charges. I think Good Energy have one specifically focused on heat pump customers that charges a lower standing charge in winter months, as well as a lower unit rate. But it makes it much harder for us to get transparency in terms of what the costs are that the suppliers are having to pay, pass-through costs, and what the costs are that they're kind of choosing to charge for elsewhere. I think for me, I would almost like to see because those costs are known, it would be nice to see a little bit more standardization around them, or at least transparency in what they're going to pay. Because I know a lot of people find it hugely confusing.
So that kind of leads me on to postcode favoritism. And this is something that I really can't get my head around. That.
And we didn't even know existed.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is something that we've been looking at switching our provider the whole of this year because our heat pumps just becoming very, very expensive to run. And people would say, oh, you need to switch on to this tariff because we're paying X. I'd go on and I'm getting a figure that's maybe 4 or 5p more than they are. And given that we are rural, but we are only maybe a mile from a large town or a medium-sized town, and we're paying a lot more than they're paying in town. We're only a mile outside. So I don't quite understand why this kind of postcode favoritism exists.
I'd be interested in understanding the different quotes that you've had there. The only cause I could see for that is if you're actually sitting in one energy distribution area, and I think there are 14 across the UK, and almost by bad luck that a mile away they're sitting in an entirely different electricity distribution region, because the prices are determined by which of those 14 regions you're in. I don't know whether that's the case or not. If it is, it's very frustrating. The difficulty is that the pressures and the kind of nature of the grid that needs to be delivered in each region is really different, and so the costs associated with that do vary. If you think about rural Scotland versus central London, you're facing two very different types of electricity system, and some of them bring efficiencies but also challenges in terms of maintaining them, and others it's much harder to run them commercially. So that tends to account for a lot of the differences that people see between different regions. You're almost paying the aggregated difficulty of your whole region in delivering electricity to homes.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm confused, which is why I asked about the standing charge first, because I would have assumed that the standing charge would have leveled out the playing field across the UK, and then everybody would have equal access to similar tariffs for electricity. But clearly it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and then that would also become a lot fairer for low-income households that are more rural.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I think one of the benefits of suppliers having the freedom to move some of those charges and levies that they pay into the unit rate is that you can create tariffs that are better for households that have different energy needs. So, for example, if you're away from your home a lot through work or for another reason, then actually it may benefit you to have a lower standing charge and pay a bit more for the unit rate, because you don't want to be paying every day for a house that you're not using energy in. You'd much rather just pay for the smaller amount of energy you use when you are there. So I think that flexibility does create, I suppose, market conditions that are favourable to some people and can help account for the diversity of our needs across the UK. But I also do totally hear your point that it makes it very opaque in terms of understanding why you're paying what you are and being able to compare apples and pears, which I guess is why systems like Big Clean Switch, where we try and effectively pull all the data together and give you a single price, come into play.
So we've kind of loosely alluded to batteries, and I think that as more and more people get electric vehicles, when are things like a vehicle to grid and vehicle to home going to become more mainstream?
Well, that is a $64 billion question. I think for me, part of the challenge is around making them really easy to understand. One of the startling stats that hasn't really changed since we started Big Clean Switch is that around 50% of UK households say they've never switched energy supplier.
Wow.
And the reason they've not switched energy supplier is because energy is confusing and boring, and very often they think it's going to be a hassle, and they don't trust anyone involved in it. They, with no disrespect to second-hand car dealers, they probably rather go and buy a second-hand car than deal with an energy company. Take up of these new very important technologies has to be bound up in a simplification for the end user. One of the things that we're trying to do in the next evolution of Big Clean Switch is really start to unpick some of those behavioural barriers to engagement in just energy tariffs in order to make it accessible to far more people. And I think things like time of use tariffs and a lot of the balancing systems that we're going to need to run our grid more effectively and reduce overall demand are going to require the same philosophical approach. I think there's been far too much focus for far too much time on technical solutions who are developed by people who are very sophisticated consumers and just can't relate to the concerns of people who aren't engaging in the system, and the technologies that we need to be designed around everyone and effectively cater to those people who find the whole thing utterly bewildering. Your starting point when you're developing any of these systems should be to say, I need to make this as easy to understand for a child as I can for, you or I, who probably thinks about this stuff every day.
A lot of our followers and a lot of people that will be watching this video have got heat pumps. And some of those people have got batteries to basically help them, run that at more costly times of day. There's a lot of concerns that time of use tariffs might get phased out. Is that a valid concern?
I don't know, actually. That's not something that I've read a great deal about. I think the difficulty with time of use tariffs comes in helping people to select them on a fair like-for-like basis. Clearly, as you develop an energy profile in half-hourly chunks, then being able to say, well, this tariff works better than that tariff when the prices are varying on a half-hourly basis. Forget those tariffs where the prices may be changing to reflect wholesale conditions, becomes very difficult. And I think that's been one of the big stalling points for take-up of these kinds of tariffs. I still see a role for them, but my suspicion is that most of this is going to end up being automated. I think the likelihood is that we're effectively going to end up purchasing energy as a service to some degree, and it will be the provider's role to run those systems that manage that balancing rather than the consumer really having to think a great deal about it. I think the energy system at the moment is a bit like needing to understand what happens in your laptop. It's like, you need a fairly advanced level of understanding to engage. And I think where we'll get to is just that, we'll go and buy the laptop and it'll work and we won't need to think about it. And, that's sad on one hand because we should all know about our energy. It's, we rely on it for life. But on the other hand, we have to be true to human nature, and I think we have to simplify all of that. But I haven't read much about the disappearance of time of use. I think certainly they've been slower in kind of acquiring market share than many people thought. But I haven't read much that says that they're likely to disappear.
Before we wrap up, Jon, it sounds like Big Clean Switch has got exciting times ahead of it, in that you are going to be expecting a lot of customers to switch next year, and you're certainly going to be encouraging that in the industry. Tell us more about the future of Big Clean Switch and what are the exciting things that you're looking forward to in 2022?
Oh, good question. I should probably mention that we're currently fundraising. I've mentioned some of the changes that need to happen in terms of the way that people are supported in terms of their electricity choices. And we're currently doing some really exciting work with brands like IKEA to bring single-click energy quotes to households via brands that they trust in order to open up energy to millions of homes every week, we hope. And our vision is that our switching platform will be placed in front of people wherever they are, whether they are purchasing something through IKEA or whether they're sorting out their council tax on their local authority website. And in the process of doing that, we're going to be building one of the UK's largest databases in terms of energy data, and then helping to use it for the low carbon transition to provide intelligence to the developers of low carbon energy products to help them to deliver better products, understand their impact and know who to promote them to. So we think the future is really exciting. And if any of your viewers would like to know more, then do please get in touch.
I think that green energy and renewables is undoubtedly the future. We all know this. I think that people are starting to accept it now, and I'm really excited to see what happens over at Big Clean Switch. And we wish you all the best for the year. And let's hope that the kind of dark, challenging days are now kind of behind us. I know we're still dealing with some of the real big issues, and as you mentioned, there's still a lot of challenges facing these electricity firms at the moment. But let's hope that as we go into next year, we start to see some really positive feedback from the government and from the industry, and we start to hopefully get those small businesses supported again with reasonable green energy tariff.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And thank you very much both for the opportunity to talk to you this morning.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jon.
Jon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.